Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. If I look rough and sound rough, it's because I'm kind of sick, but I do have a deadline for this to come out, so I have to just power through. It's also the reason that we are only looking at 2 books opposed to what I was originally going to be doing, which is looking at 3. And today we are diving into an author who I've always been curious about, but for some reason never actually gone into his work. And given that this is our Halloween special, we are looking at Stephen King, and the books we will be looking at are Misery and The Shining. First up, we have Misery, and I will say I have watched the adaptation of this with Kathy Bates, and I remember absolutely loving it, but it has been a long time since I've watched it, so I'll be totally honest, it was one of those things where I was going, oh, I remember that, rather than it ever being a kind of ability to compare. And for this one, I will be going into spoiler territory, not so much with The Shining, but I do have a lot more to say about this one in specific, whereas I've gone a bit broader with The Shining, if I'm honest. So much happens in this book in such a short space of time. The book is less than 400 pages, but you never really have a moment where it halts or slows, and I think a lot of that is thanks to the fact that we are immediately dropped into the nightmare. And there is a cat under my desk. It's Miss Zelda. Hello, are you okay? She's watching her birds. Like I say, you are immediately dropped into the nightmare with our opening line. Number one, you're number one fan. These sounds, even in the haze, and that is not just the opening line in the book, that is actually purely our opening chapter, and I want to make it clear that is not any kind of, because Stephen King probably would do something like this. The slurred and hazy shit, it's not anything offensive, don't worry about that, because I'm aware how I sound when I'm doing that, and it sounds like I'm taking the piss out of somebody. No, what's actually going on there is that our lead character, Paul Sheldon, has woken up in a strange bed, and he's very hazy, and it becomes clear later that he has been drugged, and he has been rescued from a car crash by his number one fan, which is what that number one fan thing was. He has been rescued by his number one fan, Annie Wilkes, and effectively it is a constant nightmare from there on in. Is that a phrase? I don't care. And it only gets worse because she's a huge fan of him, in particular his Misery books, and when she finds out that he has killed the character of Misery, she effectively doubles down on keeping him prisoner until he writes a new Misery book, especially for her, in which Misery lives. Oh, hello. You are such a little baby.
Oh, look at ya. Oh, look at that young lady. Look at that little baby girl. A little baby girl. A little baby girl.
Something that I was hoping was that the repetition found so frequently in this book was just a Misery thing, because it made sense here. Like, this guy is stuck in one room, mostly just stuck in one place in his bed, so there's no outside stimulus. There's nothing going on outside for him to react to, so he's just swirling thoughts. And while to an extent that does also kind of make sense in The Shining, I was really hoping it wouldn't appear there, and it kind of does, early on especially, but it is less common. My brain is completely frazzled right now, as you might imagine, because this really quite suddenly came over me on Saturday night, and I just kept waking up with hot sweats and a fever, and I'm filming this, editing it, and sorting it to be uploaded all on Monday. I barely managed to write the full script for The Shining yesterday. My brain is in the bin. Something I wasn't expecting but was definitely grateful for was the presence of really dark, kind of gallows humour throughout. I find it's not uncommon in horror, but I find it a lot more common in British horror. Actually, same goes for like British horror, Irish, Australian, anything like that. Like, where kind of dark gallows humor is already a staple of sort of everyday speech anyway, whereas I don't know that that's as much of a thing when I watch American comedy, whereas a lot of aforementioned countries humor fits into that really well. And I wasn't necessarily expecting a bit of dark humor here, but I was happy for its presence. And I think most notably that's obvious in our antagonist, Annie Wilkes, because she's so prim and proper and correct, and she dresses modestly, and she's everything, you can't take the Lord's name in vain, and it's you kind of HE double hockey sticks, and you can't even say damn. Everything proper. But murdering people and, you know, keeping a scrapbook of all the people that you've killed is normal and fine. And yeah, that's proper. That's a normal thing to do. Like I say, it's not like laugh out loud, ha ha ha, that's oh my god, this is the funniest thing I've ever read. It's more the kind of humour where in the back of your head you're going, don't laugh, don't laugh, don't laugh, this isn't funny, it's not funny, it's not funny, I swear to god that's not funny. But it is. In desperation, he pushed back the blankets with his hands for the first time, hoping against hope that it wasn't as bad as the shapes the blankets made seemed to suggest it was. It wasn't as bad, it was worse. I'm sorry, but it wasn't as bad, it was worse. Is funny, at least to me. But maybe I've got a sick sense of humour. Like, he calls her a fucking goblin when he's making his final escape. That's what I call her. That's a fucking goblin. Do you want to say hi? Oh, good. This is a fucking goblin. Oh yeah. One of my favourite bits of this book, at least in this aspect of it, is when Annie is worried about a police presence, because I believe at this point it's been a few weeks since I finished it, and I've read a few books since finishing this, so if my timeline isn't perfect, I apologise. But I believe one cop has already arrived, which we will talk about that later, but she's now worried about police coming back again. She locks Paul in a basement, and it's dank and dark, and there's full of rats and shit like that, and Paul is scared of the rats. And, and Annie says, and the rats won't bother you anyway. They may even recognise you for one of their own, Paul. They may adopt you. I'm sorry, that's fucking camp, and I will hear nothing more about it. I love it. But, of course, I should actually talk about the horror of this book. It being a horror book, or a thriller. Because, I mean, those two are very closely entwined anyway, but... Anyway, the horror of this book comes in two forms. It is both psychological and physical. There is a lot of violence within this book. But the psychological element, I think, mostly comes from, like, while it's part of the dark humour as well, the way that Annie is so prim and proper is so deeply unsettling. Because one minute she is nice Annie, she's nursing him, she's being good to him, but it's also at any moment you know she could snap. But while she's killing somebody, she wouldn't swear, and she wouldn't let them take the Lord's name in vain. Like, she still pretends that she's this proper God-fearing Christian girl type shit. Like, Imagine Girl Defined running somebody's head over with a lawnmower. Do you know what I mean? Imagine Girl Defined kneecapping somebody. That's the energy we have here. I don't know why that is the image that just went into my head. But we'll run with it if I need to talk about that in the future. But like I say, this idea of her being so proper and so well to do, it only gets more threatening throughout the book because you know what she's capable of. You know that it effectively is a facade that she doesn't just put on for other people. I think she does put that on for herself to sort of pretend that she isn't fucking insane. And what she's capable of is terrifying, and that brings us on to the physical horror of the book. And Jesus Christ, like, I knew from my vague memories of the film that we were in for some nasty stuff. I particularly do remember the kneecapping, or at least I don't know if kneecapping would be the right word, but she brings a hammer down onto his knees. So yeah, I think that counts as kneecapping. And his legs are already fucked, and she just makes it worse. And there's amputations, and and then you're finding out the kind of nurse she was, which was very difficult to read, given they were mostly adult patients and elderly patients, but given the woman that was in the news recently, I think you know what story I was talking about. That was very difficult to read because it's just like that felt a bit. It rang a bit too true, which was. I mean, Stephen King wouldn't have fucking known that this book was written in the 70s or 80s? Give me a moment. Stephen King is one of those authors where I never know how old he is. 87. For some reason, my brain was telling me 77, and that felt too early, but still, that book is still 36 years old, so, And, there's no real sort of Reservoir Dogs cutaway where you think you've seen something, but actually it's just what goes on in your imagination. No, Stephen King is giving you everything, and at times, yeah, it makes it hard to read. I was squirming in my seat, deep breathing to keep myself calm, and it was just like, a lot of it's that kind of stuff where you can feel it yourself. It's... What book was I talking about this with? I think it might have been How to Sell a Haunted House. But I feel like I've spoken about it a few times, in which is the kind of violence where it's just like, it's not overblown. I mean, one of them is just like a lot, but it still feels viscerally real. It doesn't feel like mindless, for want of a better phrase. Let's talk about that scene, because it did leave me in ruins. So, basically, things are looking completely fucking hopeless for Paul. He's like, nobody is coming to save me. I'm pretty sure that nobody knows I'm here, because Paul has been snowed in, effectively, most of the winter, and now spring is coming, and his car has been found, so an officer has arrived. Of course, he is inquiring about everything that's going on, and I believe, if I remember rightly, it's like an unrelated raid that led them to finding Paul's car. Like, the place that she hid it just so happened to be that there was a drug raid going on in the same woods. And Paul's just like, this is my chance, I'm going to start screaming, yelling, or everything I can. And yeah, it's bad at first. There's like a bit of violence, and she's stabbing a guy with a crucifix, I think it is. Some kind of stake, but if I remember rightly, it is a crucifix, or at least a cross, and it is really fucking nasty, and I'm like, oh god. But then, so this is happening at the end of one chapter, and the beginning of the next, we effectively find out that no, he's still alive, and I'm like, oh, he's gonna radio for help, that's gonna be great. And it's like, no. So two things are basically happening at once. So on our one hand, we have our cop fumbling because he's like, it's been thrown at some point or dropped, and he is on the floor, obviously in agony because he's been stabbed over and over again in the back. So he's fumbling for his gun, and he's like stretching his arm out to retrieve it. And Annie, so as he's doing this, Annie is getting on her ride, like getting her ride on. And while he's doing this, Annie is getting her ride on lawnmower started. He stretched out his hand for it. Annie swerved and ran over both his reaching hand and forearm. Blood squirted from the lawn boy's grass exhaust in an amazing jet. The kid in the trooper uniform screamed. There was a sharp clang as the mower's whirling blade struck the pistol. Then Annie was swerving up the side lawn, using it to turn, and her gaze fell on Paul for 1 second. And Paul felt sure he knew what that momentary gaze meant. First the Smoky, then him. The kid was lying on his side again. When he saw the mower bearing down on him, he rolled over on his back and dug frantically at the driveway dirt with his heels, trying to push himself under the cruiser where she couldn't get him. He didn't even come close. Annie throttled the riding lawnmower up to a scream and drove it over his head. The lawn boy's engine suddenly lugged down, and there was a series of fast, strangely liquid thudding sounds. Paul vomited beside the chair with his eyes closed. And I think Paul has the right response there. I mean, what else are you going to do? Do you want to say hi? Do you want to say hello? No. You're going to say, oh, what are you doing? Okay. What's this? Your food. Ooh. She's so pretty. Oh, show everybody your pretty face. Yeah, you show everybody how handsome you are. Yeah. Lily's so pretty, Lily's so handsome. Yeah, are you feeling shy? I also don't think I can skip the absolute state of the in-book, like, Misery writing. I don't mean the book Misery as a whole. I mean Paul Sheldon's writing. The book he is writing for Annie Wilkes. You see it. It's... Listen, I can't criticise Paul Sheldon as an author because I'm not reading his book. And the thing is, I did end up largely skimming the chapters where that was present, and I know that's bad, but I struggled. Mostly because of the fucking state of the accents. I should not be able to see people's accents I can't think of an author where it works well. I need to reread Terry Pratchett because I think he does it sometimes. The book of his that I read the most was We Free Men, which means that I wasn't paying attention when I was a kid, or he does it well, which obviously hard to tell unless I read it again, but it's kind of on theme because I think some of the accents that he's doing are meant to be Scottish. I mean, he mentions the name Cornwall at some point, so maybe it is meant to be Cornish, but it definitely doesn't feel like... I don't feel like many Americans would know the Cornish accent or any kind of West country, because those are very similar. So I feel like the accents he's writing is all meant to be like... It sounds like it's meant to be Scottish, but it's like you've never actually heard a Scottish accent before. You've just kind of been told what it sounds like. Awful. But worse than that is any of the African characters. Hezekiah being the one who does most of the speaking. And listen, it's just a mess. And I have some thoughts about Stephen King. in this regard. Maybe he's got better as these are his older books. I cannot comment on the way he writes any kind of black characters now. But in the 80s, oh my god, because we'll be talking about that in a minute when we talk about The Shining. Jesus Christ, this is awful. But like I say, at some point I will be reading some of his newer stuff. I want to read is it Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. But ooh, it's legitimately fucking offensive. And maybe to an extent, for some of the stuff you can give, like maybe the Scottish accents, I will give Stephen King the benefit of the doubt and say he's meant to be writing Paul Sheldon being a not great author. But Jesus Christ, did you have to do it like that? You're already writing tropey historical romance stuff. You don't have to add these awful accents and low-key, high-key racism on top of that as well. And it's not like that completely ruined my reading experience. This is genuinely still a fantastic. I was saying both phenomenal and fantastic there. This genuinely is still a fantastic book, and I genuinely do think it might be one of my favourites of the year, and I'm really glad that this is the one that I had to introduce me to the world of Stephen King. But Jesus Christ, I still wish it could have been done a lot fucking better. And my hopes at the end of this, so originally this was going to be done like a multi-book thing where I read this throughout, like read the Stephen King books throughout October alongside other stuff. It just didn't end up working because I had a million other things to do, but I was meant to be doing this. Oh, and then I hope this happens, but I've read them in too close a space of time for this to really like work out the way I hoped. But my hopes were that the repetition was just a misery thing, which, like I said, mostly, but I'd need to read more of his stuff to really pinpoint that. And another was the hope that the psychological and physical horror was kept at a nice balance. I don't like too much physical horror, especially in like long form stuff, because in short form it can occasionally make a lot more sense. It can be shocking, like Junji Ito's really short stories. Sometimes it's just messed up and violent, but it's still like, what do you expect? It's a Junji Ito thing, and it's also like 3 pages or something. But if you're doing a 400, 500, 600 page book, I don't want violence throughout, because that's exhausting. And yeah, that was definitely kept up. I mean, the violence is even more linked to some of the psychological aspects within The Shining. I mean, it is obviously here, but there's that difference between here of it being a deranged fan keeping somebody hostage and versus a father going for his family. Very different, but yeah, still kept. And the dark humour is something I was hoping to see more of. Kind of present, but less so in The Shining. It's actually present a bit more earlier on, not so much while the main horror stuff is happening, as far as I would say. And my hope was that we would get no more horrendous accents, which we don't, but we do get something. We get something, so let's start talking about The Shining. So with The Shining, I obviously knew about the film, but unlike with Misery, I never watched it. So I tried when I was younger, but when I was younger, I had a real blood phobia, and I then saw the blood elevator scene, and immediately went, no, absolutely fucking not. I am not watching this film, and I'm sure at some point I will actually get round to watching it again, now that I no longer really have that phobia, because I think if I did, I wouldn't be able to watch half the wrestling I watch. I mean, me trying to watch John Moxley matches where I'm terrified of blood, it would not have worked. But point is, I cannot sort of make judgments on the book based on the film. But I think this is different to Misery in the fact that the thing with The Shining is that it had much more of a cultural impact, because I've seen much more of this film and know much more about that film than I did with Misery. So there was an aspect of, I did kind of have certain expectations of the book going in, and almost all and almost all of the things that I expected to see are film exclusive things. I present you all with your baby.
She is a baby. Yeah. Is it baby time?
Yeah, and as well as the film, I will say that I did watch the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode a lot when I was a kid, which has, like, one of the parts of that is the shinning. But recently, I rewatched that because I kept thinking about it while I was reading the first part of this book. The version on Disney Plus is definitely fucking shorter than the version I had on DVD when I was a kid. Because I swear, there are twins in The Simpsons. I can't remember their names because I watched The Simpsons a lot more when I was a kid than I do now, and it's not something that stuck with me. But I swear they're in the version that I watched when I was a kid. I swear they weren't in the one that is on Disney Plus. But I may be mistaken, and that's not the point. It is one scene in particular that is in both versions that sticks in my head. But that is a film thing. But this is the scene. I will put it in here because the scene played on repeat whenever I was thinking about, oh, I'm going to have to read The Shining later today. And then just the phrase, makes Homer something something.
Hello! What do you think, Marge? All I need is a title. I was thinking along the lines of no TV and no beer make Homer something something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
So Jack Torrance and his wife Wendy and 5-year-old son Danny have had to effectively uphold their life as Jack was fired from his teaching position, and Jack has been granted a caretaker position at a hotel called the Overlook. And rather than this being a position while there are any guests around or anything like that, the hotel will be completely empty bar the three of them, because this is during the winter season where you are effectively snowed in until the springtime. We discover relatively early on that the young boy Danny does seem to have some kind of premonition type sort of abilities, and also the ability to see into people's thoughts. And when he gets to the hotel, as people are all getting ready to leave for the season's end, he meets a cook called Halloran, and Halloran explains to him that they're the same sort of person. They both have these abilities, though Danny's is remarkably strong. And Halloran says that his mother always called this The Shining, hence the name of the book. And while we are on this topic, before we get on to my usual plot review and all that sort of stuff, before we get on to anything else, let's talk about Halloran, shall we? 2 interesting facts for you. Halloran is black. Stephen King is not. Just a useful bit of information for you. And I say this because, fuck me, the amount of slurs that appear in this book is... I was so uncomfortable reading any scene where we are following Halloran, and yeah, sure, like, he is often the one, Halloran, that is often the one using the N word, hard R, and also using the C slur in terms of, again, used against black people. If you don't know, then fine, but if you do, then I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And there are both times where he's using it himself, and it is a sort of, there are slurs used against him. Now, this may take some explanation, but let me finish it before you start frantically typing comments. In this book, I would find it, not on a moral sense, in a written piece of fiction sense, I would find it more acceptable that he was being called these things by somebody else than him using them. Now, I don't mean that in a, it's fine to call black people slurs and they can't use them themselves. Obviously, I don't fucking mean that. But given that this is a book written by a white man, to me, again, obviously not somebody with any authority over these fucking things, to me, it would make sense for him to be able to write characters who are racist. Whereas I personally would not say that he has the authority to write a black character in the way that he has. Again, no authority. But God, it made me feel uncomfortable, but I do sort of wonder how more black readers would feel about it than me. But, like, were this a book written by a black author, then him, you know, using slurs, as it were, himself, wouldn't have a problem, because that's words that they can also use. If a black person wants to call themselves the N-word, that's fine. If a white person wants to, in any way, call a black person the N-word, that's dodgy. That's weird. But, like I say, I think it makes sense for the, you know, white characters to be calling him. It's like a backwards type of town anyway. It's not necessarily super surprising. It just... there was this one part where it felt like he was trying to fit as many, like, how many times can he say the N-word in one chapter? And then the C slur kept coming up as well, and I'm like, oh, okay, you're just trying to write as many fucking slurs as you can in one page as you can? Jesus. But, like I say, there are people better suited to talking about this than me. I have my opinions, clearly, but I would look towards black reviewers looking at this, talking about this character, because they may have completely different opinions to me. They may agree. Their opinions hold more weight than mine do. But let's get into talking about the rest of the book, and as always, let's get onto that opening line. Jack Torrance thought, a vicious little prick. And it's a great opener, not just because it is eye-catching, but also because it sets Jack up as a bellend from the start, because here's the thing, Jack does not, as I assumed, become a bad person because of the hotel. The hotel sees that Jack already has a lot of darkness, a lot of badness within him, and brings it out, and it sort of goes from, oh, he's got an anger management problem, to, oh, he's got a killing his family problem. And I'm glad that the book, as it were, doesn't pretend that this is any other way, because it's not like I'm being gaslit by the book, where I can clearly see that he's a bellend, but I'm being told that he's this great guy. The only person that thinks Jack has any decency is Jack, because, like, he always has an excuse for fucking everything, but God forbid anything is his fault. So the whole thing, like, so I said he was fired from being a teacher. Yes, because he was mad violent towards one of his fucking students, And we see parts that, like, we gradually see bits of how that came together and all of that. And it's like, a kid was struggling. And who is it? Chunky.
Come here. Oh. Chunky baby. Oh. What are we doing? Get our legs. Get our legs. What are we doing? Oh, what are we doing?
So, yeah, he effectively berates a child and then it escalates. So, this kid is on a debate team run by Jack, and it's clear that this kid is like, has a lot of potential, but he struggles because he has a stutter. And this kid doesn't want to confront the fact that he has a stutter. He goes to Jack and says, he doesn't, I don't have a stutter, but he is stuttering as that goes on. And I take it with a pinch of salt because it does feel like Jack is telling this story, but that's what we're presented with. And I mean, he's not, because it's all third person, but it feels like Jack's telling a story, if that makes sense. And he's also complaining that it's like, because there's a timer on the debate stuff. It's like, you put the timer differently, so I didn't have as much time. You set the timer late or something, and or you pressed it early rather. And there are two incidents. So in the first one, Jack just kind of bullies him, like he's just rude. And it's like, that's uncalled for. And then later on, he actually does get actively violent with him. And it absolutely is like, Jack's all like, oh, yeah, no, it's basically this kid's fault. Bear in mind, he teaches high school. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is 14 to 18. And Jack is I can't remember if he said how old the child is, but 14 to 18. And Jack is a grown-ass man. Cannot take responsibility over any of his fucking actions. And that gets so much worse as it goes on. But even from the start, the way he talks about his wife, like, because she worries, because previously he used to be an alcoholic, and that does come up a lot throughout the book, and she's worried about him. And especially given that at one point, while drunk, little Danny, I believe this was the thing that made him stop drinking, Danny had like messed up some of his papers on a book or something that he was writing, and to stop him moving the papers anymore, he grabbed his arm, but he grabbed it so hard, I think he was like 2 or something, was Danny. He grabbed his arm so hard that he broke it. I think he might have twisted it as well, I imagine so. But like, wow, I wonder why Wendy doesn't fucking trust you. And she says that maybe I should have got divorced at the time. But like, yeah, probably, because quite frankly, I'm not a parent. But if my partner broke my child's arm, I would like to think that I'd be out of the fucking door. The way he talks about constantly is like, oh, she's fucking nagging me. But what are you doing here? What are you doing there? Like, you were a chronic alcoholic for years. It was a horrendous problem. You were out at all hours. You would come back pissed drunk. You injured your fucking son. So, yeah, she's going to wonder how you're doing and what you're doing, because you've got previous for causing fucking problems. But God forbid that. God forbid she worry about her former alcoholic husband. What a shame, Jack. Isn't she fucking awful? I cannot stand Jack, but I know that that's the point. Oh, you're sitting on my hand. Are you okay? We have a goblin. Ah! So I was just talking for like 5-10 minutes, and turns out that one of the cats had turned my fucking recorder off. So let me find where I was. I believe I was just talking about how Wendy should have divorced Jack's arse. And honestly, it took a lot of escalation, and it took it to be getting quite violent for me to be surprised by any of Jack's actions, because he was already calling her this, that, and the other behind the scenes. And, like, it wasn't surprising to me when he called her a bitch to her face. Like, there's this one scene where there's been a lot of lead up to it. So Halloran, during the conversation where he's explaining to Danny, it's like, you have the Shining, he's also telling him that, like, yeah, it's probably going to be a lot stronger, and you're going to feel fucking weird in this place. Like, this place will mess with you because of this. And he also says two things. One, as far as he is aware, the images in that place cannot hurt him. Also, don't go into room 217. Just don't. Now, not the most subtle writing from Stephen King is he's like, Halloran's going, don't go into 217. And Danny's like, this reminds me of Blackbeard. Ooh, when the man says don't go in there, and the woman goes in there and horrible things are inside. Stephen King, you're a better writer than Stephen King, you're a better writer than that, and you fucking know it. But point is, we have another scene where Danny's sat outside it. He's like holding the key, and he's like, I can't look through the peepholes because it doesn't work that way. Because obviously you can only look out from a peephole. You can't look into a room. Also, not a fucking chance he could see in a peephole. I remember in uni, our classrooms had peepholes in them, and they were both ways that you could see through those ones both directions. But my 5'1" ass could not get up to them to see them. Not a fucking how low down are the peepholes in this hotel that a 5-year-old could see through them? Anyway, pointless inconsistencies that don't really need to be spoken about. He sits outside it but doesn't go in at that point, and then a few chapters later he finally makes his way in. The bedroom itself seems normal, but then he goes into the bathroom, and the curtains are drawn around the bath shower, and he opens them up, and there is, as far as the hotel is telling him, a dead woman in the bath. And he does what Halloran tells him. He closes his eyes real fucking tight, and he opens them back up, and she's still there, and she's opened her eyes. So he like gets it to the door, but on the one hand, he knows that he left that door open and now it's closed, and on the other, his brain and probably the hotel affecting him, his brain is going like, it's not telling him to open the door. It's like there's something blocking that. So the last thing we see in that chapter is her bearing down on Danny, and she wraps her hands around his neck. And then in the following chapters, you know, there's the obvious feeling that, oh my god, Jack's done it again. He's hurt his son again. And then it does become clear that that's not the case. And then we have a bit of a miscommunication because Danny says she did it, and then it's like, oh my god, has Wendy done it? And obviously we know that's not true. But Jack gets this weird perverse thrill of like, oh, the turns have tabled now, haven't they? And it's like, no. And then bell end. So like what I was saying here is that it's like, it wasn't surprising to anybody that Jack could be capable of doing this, even before the hotel has like fully got to him. But then he goes into room 217, sees exactly what Danny has seen, leaves, and then lies. And effectively gaslights Danny into questioning what he saw. Now, he's got a strong mind as Danny, obviously, because of all the Shining stuff. So he's like, but he still starts questioning, because that's his dad, and he's 5. So he's going to believe everything his dad tells him. Like, there are some great scenes later on where Jack's fully cracked, he's fully turned, and Danny, he's running away, and Jack tells him to come here right now, and Danny, like, hesitates for a moment, takes a couple steps towards him because of that instinct of a little kid. You do what your parents tell you. And then he's like, wait, no, that's not my dad. Run. That works really well. But yeah, Jack, not a protagonist. Not a protagonist one bit. He is as much of an antagonist as a hotel, and that is true from the beginning. He's a bellend. I do think I preferred, in general, the sections where we were following Danny to following Jack. Obviously, because Jack's a bellend, and it makes it hard to enjoy. Like, most of the time spent with Jack is me just going, God, I can't wait for this to end, because I hope that means you get your comeuppance. Whereas with Danny, it's like he's this strong little hero. And I do have a bit of an issue where I think Stephen King made him a little bit too young. First of all, because 5 is so young. That's like, what? You've just started primary school at 4 or 5, right? Like, if you don't do reception, because not everybody does, you're definitely in, like, year 1. That's an infant that is barely not a toddler. And what that means is that the way that he seems older than he is just like, you have to kind of remind yourself that he's only 5. And on the one hand, I will say that the Shining does make him, it matures him a little bit, because it would do, but there's still obviously things that he doesn't know. So, like, yeah, he can read somebody's mind, but he doesn't understand what a woman means when she's thinking that she wants to get in another guy's pants. He doesn't really get that. And there's some sweet childhood, like, oblivion, whatever. You know what I mean. The child is oblivious. But sometimes it just reads like, if he'd have been even 8 or 9, it would have, I think, to me, made a little bit more sense, because he has that maturity because of the Shining, where the weird things where it's like sometimes he feels a bit older than he is. I feel like that makes sense if he is actually 8 or 9, where it's like, you're still a child, but you definitely feel older than a toddler, which 5 is barely older than a toddler, like I'm saying, but you're definitely not anywhere encroaching teen years yet. And the childish sort of lack of awareness of certain things, a lack of knowledge because he's young, still would make sense at that age. I do just think that was a bit of a it didn't ruin my experience of the book, but it was, like I say, I did feel like I was having to remind myself of how young he was. But I will say, him being so young, and this would still be the case if, you know, he were a couple of years older, kind of thing. The thing with him being he's just this little fragile baby, and some of those things are fucking heartbreaking. Even just, you know, you hear about the moment when he was this little toddler and he had his arm broken, and because he's so perceptive about everything, he just wants to be so good and perfect for his dad, because he basically doesn't want his dad to be a dickhead again. And obviously that would be true for any child, but because he's so perceptive as to how everybody else is feeling, then everything affects him really badly, because he just wants to make sure everybody's happy. And also, he's this little hero, despite being little. He's so small, he's such a little baby, because he is literally an infant, and yet he's this big hero, and it's so effective of how heartbreaking it is, because he doesn't want to. There's this scene towards the end. I said I wasn't going into spoiler territory. Yeah, this is kind of that, but I did with Misery, so fine. So yeah, there's this scene towards the end where the hotel has fully taken over Jack. And by the way, difference between the film and the book here. I'm not doing like a adaptational, you know, deep dive here, but I expected him to have an axe, because I knew the Here's Johnny thing was just a film thing, but not swinging an axe, he's swinging a roque mallet. It's a bit like croquet, but not quite. And yeah, that's just a difference that I noticed. Anyway, the hotel has fully taken over Jack at this point, and he's swinging this mallet about, and he's screaming, and he's yelling, and he's hunting Danny at this point, because the hotel is effectively using Jack to get to Danny because of the way that because of how powerful he is. Also, earlier, because while I'm thinking about the film adaptation changes, I mentioned Blood Elevator, not a part of the book. The twins, didn't spot them. Again, I'm not saying that I spotted everything, but I would have noticed the fucking blood elevator, because the elevator kept being mentioned a lot, and I was like, oh, that's what's happening. No, it's like party, like remnants of a party, because it's like leftovers of what the hotel has been doing, like the ghosts of the hotel. And no twins. I swear there's no twins. So, that's odd. But, anyway, there is this point where we've got Danny, this 5-year-old little soldier, is running away from his dad, but there's a point where there is nothing else he can do. He has to confront him. And before, like, effectively either distracting him or making, like, yeah, effectively distracting him in such a way that he can make an escape. And he just has to stand up to him and go, "You're not my dad. You're just pretending." And there is this graphic scene where after Danny makes his escape there, I believe, it might be the wrong way around, but I'm pretty sure this doesn't happen in front of Danny. The amalgamation of Hotel and Jack just beats its own face in with the mallet to basically go, right, then fine, there won't be any Jack left. And it is a powerful scene because, again, this is a little boy who just wants to do best by his parents, because that's often what little kids do. And, I think what makes him really work as a character, and just in general, I think the reason this works well, and it's what makes me curious about Dr. Sleep, is that I think Danny really works as a character because in him, The Shining feels like how kids are already weirdly perceptive. Like, they know stuff that we'd rather they didn't, because they pick up on our conversations and they ask you, like, what does this mean? And they're like, where did you hear that? Those sorts of things. Or, like, they're aware that you're arguing when you don't think they are, or they're aware there's problems when you don't think there are, and that sort of thing. Like, kids know that you struggle with money, but even if you try and hide that from them, that sort of thing. Or, Danny is aware that there are a lot of problems with his parents, but obviously that is amplified to fuck because of The Shining, and I think that works really nicely. And that's what makes me curious about Dr. Sleep, because how does that work with adult Danny? Because that is what, as far as I can remember, that's what that's about. I believe there was a film adaptation of that as well, with Ewan McGregor in it, playing Danny, I assume. So yeah, I would be interested to read that in the future. And I will say, I think the horror elements, when we get to these chase parts especially, like, I think they generally work better when we're not focusing on Jack, because I think horror always works better when we are in the position of the prey. So, I mean, sometimes it works well in films and stuff. I think it is, or maybe even in games as well. But I do. Listen, I was forced to watch some horror films at the weekend, but I had a lot of fun because I took the piss out of my friend for most of it. But I think this works. I do not play horror games because, I've played like one or two, and I am a baby. But with horror films, you get those moments where, like, you can see our characters and it's clear that this is meant to be POV, you are the villain sort of thing. And, actual POV, not TikTok POV, because don't get me started. But I think it works well when you are in that position of the prey, because that's how good tension, because you are as oblivious to whatever's going around you as the characters in the book. So you don't know when, say, Jack is suddenly going to out of nowhere and just be like, hello, I am here and I am here to kill you. sort of thing. Whereas when you're Jack, I find that it feels, when you're with Jack, because it is third person, when you're with him, it feels less tense. Because it's like, yeah, I know he's going to happen upon one of our, family members here, but it just feels less. What's the word? I can't think of it, but when you are involved, it's not the word I'm thinking of, but I'm sure I will either think of it in editing or I won't. Out of the pair, I think I did definitely prefer Misery. The Shining was, first of all, it's a long book. The version I had, small text, like this. Hang on, let me get it down. Move you here. So here, I haven't taken my labels out yet, but it's like 600 pages, and the text is small. Like, relatively small. Is it relatively normal size? But it's like 600 plus pages. That, to me, is a long-ass book. I think anything over like 400, 450 pages, you're getting to long book for me. And at times, it was feeling a bit repetitive. Not in the way that Misery, where it's like overt repetition, but there were just like motifs that felt like they were just like, it feels like you've already told me this sort of thing. But I think honestly, it's just like I can see myself reading Misery again. I can't see myself reading The Shining again, but I am still interested in the sequel, and I am still interested in reading more Stephen King. I have Pet Sematary in front of me right now. I will be reading it in the future because this was meant to be being featured in this video. I have been told that I should read Fairy Tale, which I believe is one of his newest ones. It's meant to be very good, and I would also like to read more of his new stuff because I would like to see and hope that the racism is left. Is left? Has left. You know what I mean? It's just, I really hope he's writing people of colour better. You would like to think, because, the ideas of what is acceptable to publish and write is different, even, 30 plus years ago to now. So, I hope it's different. I hope it's better. But I will only be able to find out by reading. So, if you have read either of these, or you've read more Stephen King that you would like to recommend to me, please let me know in the comments. And if you are going to talk about any book, make sure it is spoiler free, and also feel free to recommend any other books that you feel like telling me I should read, good, bad, or indifferent. So you can also like, subscribe, put your notifications on, and all the other cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do. But more importantly, you can have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whatever you are watching this. Take good care of yourselves. Right.